The morning sun cast long shadows across the military academy grounds as Sarah Martinez adjusted her crisp cadet uniform one last time before entering the briefing room. At 22, she was older than most of her classmates, having spent 4 years working various jobs to save money for college before applying to the prestigious Coastal Defense Academy. Her dark hair was pulled back in regulation style, and her brown eyes held a determination that had carried her through countless challenges. As she walked down the hallway, whispers followed in her wake. Sarah had grown accustomed to the sideways glances and hushed conversations. Being one of only 12 women in a class of 200 cadets made her stand out. But it wasn't just her gender that drew attention. There was something different about Sarah Martinez that her fellow cadets couldn't quite place. "There goes Martinez again," whispered Cadet Johnson to his friend Walker as they watched her pass. "Acting like she belongs here with the real soldiers." Walker snorted quietly. "My dad says women don't have what it takes for real combat. They're just checking boxes for diversity." Sarah heard every word but kept walking. She had learned early in her time at the academy that responding to such comments only made things worse. Instead, she focused on her studies, physical training, and the mysterious past she had never shared with anyone at the school. The briefing room buzzed with nervous energy as all 200 cadets filed in for their final exercise announcement. This would determine their graduation rankings and future military assignments. Sarah took a seat in the middle section, noting how the empty chairs around her created an invisible barrier. She had stopped trying to make friends months ago. Colonel Richards, the academy commandant, stepped to the podium with the bearing of a man who had seen real combat. His steel-gray hair was perfectly groomed, and his uniform displayed ribbons from conflicts most of the cadets had only read about in history books. "Cadets," his voice boomed across the room, "in 72 hours, you will participate in Operation Thunderstrike. This will be a comprehensive field exercise testing everything you've learned over the past 4 years. You will be divided into teams of 10 and dropped into different sectors of the Blackwater training ground." The room erupted in excited murmurs. Blackwater was legendary among military training facilities, covering over 50,000 acres of varied terrain that perfectly simulated real combat environments. Each team will have 72 hours to complete a series of objectives while being hunted by our best instructors, playing the role of enemy forces. The team that performs best will receive priority assignment to their preferred military branch upon graduation. Cadet Thompson, who sat near the front, raised his hand. "Sir, how will teams be selected?" Colonel Richards smiled grimly. "Random assignment. No exceptions. You'll work with whoever fate gives you, just like in real military operations." As the briefing continued with tactical details and safety protocols, Sarah's mind wandered to memories she had buried deep. Images of desert landscapes, the sound of helicopter rotors, and faces of people she would never see again flashed through her consciousness. She touched the small scar on her left wrist, hidden beneath her uniform sleeve, and forced herself to focus on the present. After the briefing, cadets gathered in small groups to discuss strategy and hope for favorable team assignments. Sarah walked alone toward the library, planning to research the terrain and weather patterns of Blackwater. As she passed a cluster of male cadets, their conversation grew louder. "I just hope I don't get stuck with any dead weight," announced Cadet Morrison, a tall blonde who had made his disdain for female cadets clear from day one. "This exercise is too important to babysit someone who can't keep up." "Tell me about it," agreed Cadet Stevens. "My older brother graduated 5 years ago and said the real military isn't like this diversity experiment. In actual combat, weakness gets people killed." Thompson nodded enthusiastically. "At least we know Martinez won't be a problem for long. Word is, she's planning to go into military intelligence anyway. Perfect place for someone who can't handle real action." Sarah paused, her hand tightening on her textbook. Military intelligence. If only they knew the truth about what she had done in the intelligence field during those missing 4 years between high school and the academy. The classified missions, the lives saved, the awards that would never appear on any public record. "She's probably hoping to ride someone else's coattails through the exercise," Morrison continued. "I heard she's never even been in a real fight." This time Sarah couldn't help herself. She turned around with a slight smile. You're right, Morrison. I've never been in a real fight. Her voice carried just enough emphasis on the word fight to make the statement technically true, while hiding volumes of reality. The group of cadets looked surprised that she had responded. They were used to her ignoring their comments. At least she's honest about it, Stevens said with a condescending laugh. Don't worry, Martinez. Maybe you'll get lucky and be put with some guys who can protect you when things get rough. Sarah's smile widened. I appreciate the concern, really. She turned and continued toward the library, leaving the group to congratulate themselves on putting her in her place. What they didn't know was that Sarah Martinez had never been in a fight, because fights implied equal opponents. What she had experienced was something entirely different. 3 days later, the teams were announced. Sarah found herself assigned to Team Delta, with 9 male cadets, including Morrison and Stevens. The irony wasn't lost on her. As she looked at the roster, she recognized most of the names as cadets who had made their opinions about women in combat very clear over the past 4 years. Team Delta gathered for their first planning session in a cramped conference room. Morrison, who had quickly assumed leadership, spread maps across the table while the others leaned in to study their assigned sector. All right, listen up, Morrison began. Our objective is to secure and hold Hill 247, while eliminating at least 3 instructor teams. The terrain is mostly forest with some rocky outcroppings. Weather forecast shows possible rain on day 2. Cadet Banks, a stocky redhead from Texas, pointed to a ridgeline on the map. If we approach from the north, we can use this high ground for overwatch positions. Good thinking, Morrison agreed. Stevens, you and Johnson take point positions. Walker and Thompson, you're our heavy weapons team. Banks and Rodriguez handle communications. Sarah noticed she hadn't been assigned a role yet. She studied the map more carefully, noting several details the others had missed. What about supply lines? She asked quietly. Morrison looked up with barely concealed irritation. What about them? The northern approach puts us 3 kilometers from the nearest water source. If we're holding a position for potentially 3 days, we'll need to consider resupply or alternative routes. Stevens rolled his eyes. We'll be fine. It's just an exercise. Sarah bit back her response. In her experience, the exercises that seemed simple were often the ones that went wrong fastest. Also, she continued, the ridge line Banks identified offers good visibility, but it also makes us visible to anyone in the valley. If the instructors are using thermal imaging after dark, we'll stand out like Christmas trees. Morrison's jaw tightened. Martinez, we appreciate your input, but some of us have actually studied tactical operations before this exercise. Of course, Sarah replied smoothly. I just thought it might be worth considering alternative approaches. How about this? Morrison said with false patience. You can handle camp maintenance and first aid duties. Leave the tactical planning to those of us who understand warfare. The other cadets chuckled, and Sarah nodded agreeably. Camp maintenance and first aid. If only they knew that she had once coordinated logistics for a classified operation involving 3 different special forces units across 4 countries, or that her medical training included battlefield surgery techniques that weren't taught in standard military first aid courses. As the team continued planning their approach, Sarah listened quietly while mentally cataloging their mistakes. They were treating this like a game, not understanding that their instructors were combat veterans who had faced real enemies in real wars. The tactics they were developing would work against other cadets but would fail spectacularly against experienced soldiers. She could tell them about the importance of multiple extraction routes, the need for counter-surveillance measures, or the way experienced operators moved through hostile territory. She could explain how to set up proper communication protocols that wouldn't be easily intercepted, or how to establish defensive positions that could withstand sustained assault. But she didn't. Instead, she took notes on their plan and began developing contingencies in her head for when everything went wrong, because she knew it would go wrong. It always did when people underestimated their opponents. That evening, Sarah sat alone in her dormitory room, looking at a photograph she kept hidden in her desk drawer. It showed her standing with a group of soldiers in desert camouflage, their faces blurred for security reasons. In the photo, She wore the same uniform as the others, and the confident smile on her face belonged to someone who had earned her place among America's most elite warriors. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She quickly hid the photograph and opened the door to find her roommate, Jenny Chen, one of the few other female cadets in their year. "Hey," Jenny said carefully. "I heard about your team assignment for Thunder Strike." Sarah shrugged. "Could be worse." Jenny stepped into the room and lowered her voice. "Sarah, I know we haven't talked much, but I've watched how they treat you. It's not right." "It's fine, Jenny. Really." "No, it's not fine. You score higher than 90% of the cadets in tactical analysis. Your physical fitness scores are in the top 10%. Your marksmanship ratings are perfect. Yet they act like you don't belong here." Sarah sat on her bed and looked at her roommate with genuine appreciation. "Thanks for saying that. It means more than you know." Jenny sat across from her. "There's something different about you, Sarah. The way you move, the way you analyze situations, even the way you sleep. You don't sleep like someone who's never been in danger." For a moment, Sarah considered telling Jenny the truth. About the years before the academy, about the missions that officially never happened, about the call sign that had once struck fear into the hearts of enemies across 3 continents. But classified meant classified. Even to someone who might understand. "We all have our stories," Sarah said finally. Jenny nodded, understanding that she wouldn't get more information. "Just be careful in that exercise. Some of those guys would rather fail than admit you might be better than them." After Jenny left, Sarah lay on her bed staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow they would be transported to Blackwater for the beginning of Thunder Strike. In 72 hours, her 4 years of careful anonymity might come to an end. She thought about the instructors who would be hunting them during the exercise. Men like Sergeant Major Harrison, who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, Captain Williams, who had led a reconnaissance unit in Syria, Master Sergeant Burke, whose exploits in classified operations were legendary among those with the proper clearance level. These weren't academy instructors playing war games. These were warriors who had faced death and emerged victorious. They would see through amateur tactics within hours. As Sarah drifted off to sleep, she wondered if Team Delta would survive long enough for her to reveal who she really was, or if circumstances would force her to break her cover before she graduated and could disappear into whatever assignment the military had planned for the former operative known as Iron Wolf. The transport helicopter's rotors thundered overhead as Team Delta studied their insertion point from 1,000 feet above Blackwater training ground. Sarah looked out the small window at the dense forest canopy below, noting terrain features that hadn't been visible on the maps they had studied. Her trained eye automatically identified potential landing zones, defensive positions, and escape routes. Morrison was shouting over the noise of the engines, giving last-minute instructions to the team. "Remember, we hit the ground running. Secure the LZ, establish communications, then move toward our objective. No mistakes, no delays, and nobody gets left behind." The other cadets nodded enthusiastically, their faces showing the mixture of excitement and nervousness that Sarah remembered from her first real operations years ago. The difference was that back then, people's lives actually depended on their performance. 2 minutes, the crew chief called out. Sarah checked her equipment one final time. Standard cadet gear. Basic tactical vest. Training rifle loaded with simulation rounds. Communication radio. First aid kit. And 3 days' worth of field rations. Nothing compared to the advanced equipment she had once carried into hostile territory. But it would have to do. The helicopter touched down in a small clearing, and Team Delta quickly rappelled to the ground. As soon as the last cadet was clear, the aircraft lifted off, leaving them alone in the vast wilderness of Blackwater. Morrison immediately began establishing their perimeter, while Stevens attempted to raise communications with base camp. The rest of the team took defensive positions around the landing zone, scanning the tree line for threats. Sarah knelt behind a fallen log and observed her teammates' movements. Their formations were textbook perfect for academy exercises, but they moved too loudly, took too long to establish security, and their radio communications followed predictable patterns that any experienced enemy could easily intercept. "Comms are up," Stevens reported after several minutes of trying different frequencies. Base camp confirms we're active in Sector 7. First objective is Hill 247, bearing 270 degrees, approximately 4 clicks from our position. Morrison studied his compass and map. That puts us here. He pointed to their location. If we move out now, we can reach the base of the hill before nightfall and assault the position at first light. Sarah cleared her throat softly. Morrison, might I suggest we scout the route first? 4 kilometers through unknown terrain could have obstacles we haven't planned for. Morrison's expression showed his growing irritation with her input. Martinez, we've been over this. The route is clearly marked on the map. Trees, some streams, basic forest terrain, nothing we can't handle. Of course, Sarah replied. I just thought it might be wise to send a small reconnaissance team ahead of the main group. That's exactly the kind of thinking that slows down operations, Stevens interjected. We need to move fast and strike hard, not waste time being cautious. Banks nodded in agreement. My brother went through this same exercise 2 years ago. He said the teams that hesitated were the first ones eliminated. Sarah said nothing more, but she noticed several things her teammates had missed. The landing zone they had just vacated showed signs of recent use by other teams. Broken branches were too fresh, footprints in the soft earth too clear. Other cadets had been inserted here within the past few hours, which meant the instructors already knew this was a favored approach route. As Team Delta began their movement toward Hill 247, Sarah took point position despite Morrison's initial objection. Since you're so concerned about reconnaissance, he had said sarcastically, you can be our eyes and ears up front. What Morrison didn't realize was that he had just given Sarah exactly what she wanted. In the lead position, she could guide their movement and potentially keep them out of the worst dangers. For the first 2 hours, their advance went smoothly. The forest was dense but manageable, and they made good time toward their objective. Sarah had quietly guided them around several areas that would have slowed their progress, though she let Morrison believe the route choices were his idea. It was when they stopped for a brief rest that things began to go wrong. Movement, 2 o'clock, whispered Johnson from his position on the team's right flank. Everyone froze and slowly turned their weapons toward the indicated direction. Through the trees, they could see glimpses of other cadets moving parallel to their position. Team Echo, Stevens whispered after studying them through his scope. They're about 300 meters away, heading in the same direction we are. Morrison grinned. Perfect. If we can take them out now, that's one less team competing for the same objective. Sarah felt a chill of concern. Morrison, our primary mission is to secure Hill 247. Engaging another team here would compromise our position and alert any instructors in the area to our presence. Martinez, sometimes you have to take risks to win, Morrison replied. Stevens, Johnson, circle around to their left. Walker and Thompson, you're with me for a frontal assault. Everyone else, provide covering fire. What about noise discipline? Sarah asked quietly. Gunfire will be heard for kilometers in this forest. Morrison was already moving. That's a risk we'll have to take. Time to show these instructors what Team Delta can do. What happened next was a perfect example of why amateur tactics failed against experienced opponents. Team Delta's assault on Team Echo was loud, clumsy, and completely predictable. Both teams fired simulation rounds at each other for nearly 10 minutes, neither gaining a clear advantage. The sound of their firefight echoed through the forest like a dinner bell for predators. Sarah had taken cover behind a large tree and was observing the battle rather than participating when her radio crackled to life with a transmission that made her blood run cold. All teams, this is Thunder Base. Be advised, we have reports of actual hostile forces operating in Sector 7. This is not a drill. Unknown personnel have been observed in your area and may be armed with real weapons. The simulation round stopped firing as both teams heard the transmission. Morrison looked at Sarah with confusion. What the hell does that mean? Before she could answer, the distinctive crack of real gunfire erupted from the hillside above them. But these weren't training rifles. These were high-powered weapons firing live ammunition. Take cover, Sarah shouted, her voice carrying an authority that made everyone drop immediately. "Those are real bullets." More gunfire erupted from multiple positions around them, and Sarah could hear the unmistakable whistle of rounds passing overhead. Someone was shooting at them with actual intent to kill. "Thunderbase, this is Team Delta," Morrison screamed into his radio. "We're taking live fire in Sector 7. Request immediate extraction." Static answered him. "Thunderbase, respond." Stevens tried his radio with the same result. Sarah had taken cover behind a boulder and was observing the terrain around them with the practiced eye of someone who had survived real combat. The attackers had positioned themselves perfectly to trap both cadet teams in a crossfire. Professional work. "Everyone stay down," she commanded. "Those positions are occupied by people who know what they're doing." "How can you tell?" Johnson asked, his voice shaking with fear. Sarah pointed to the hillside. "Look at their muzzle flashes. They're spaced exactly right to create overlapping fields of fire. Their timing is coordinated. And they're not wasting ammunition trying to hit us directly. They're herding us toward something." Morrison's face was pale with terror. "What do we do? Our radios aren't working, and we don't even know how many there are." For the first time since joining the academy, Sarah felt the familiar calm that came over her in life-threatening situations. The same feeling she had experienced in Syria when her convoy was ambushed. The same clarity that had guided her through countless dangerous missions. "First, we need to understand what we're facing," she said quietly. "These aren't random attackers. They know military tactics. They've prepared this ambush in advance. And they chose this location specifically." Another burst of gunfire forced everyone lower behind their cover. "How do you know all this?" Stevens demanded. Sarah looked at her teammates, these young cadets, who had spent 4 years learning about warfare from textbooks and training exercises. They had never faced an enemy who actually wanted to kill them. They didn't understand that everything changed when the bullets were real. "Because," she said slowly, "I've been in this situation before." The team stared at her in disbelief. Martinez, the quiet cadet they had dismissed as inexperienced, was speaking with the confidence of a combat veteran. "That's impossible," Morrison stammered. "You're just a cadet like the rest of us." Another radio transmission cut through their argument, but this time it wasn't from Thunderbase. It was from their attackers. "Attention military cadets," a cold voice spoke in accented English. "You are surrounded by forces of the Revolutionary Liberation Front. Surrender immediately, and you will not be harmed. Attempt to escape, and you will be shot." The transmission ended, leaving Team Delta and the scattered members of Team Echo in stunned silence. Walker's voice was barely a whisper. "Who is the Revolutionary Liberation Front?" Sarah's jaw tightened as recognition flooded her memory. She knew that name. She knew it from classified briefings and intelligence reports that most people would never see. The RLF was a terrorist organization that had been active in Central America and parts of the Middle East. They were professional, ruthless, and very dangerous. But what were they doing at a military training exercise in the United States? "Thompson, can you see any of Team Echo from your position?" Sarah asked quietly. Thompson raised his head slightly and peered through the trees. "2 of them are pinned down about 50 meters to our right. I can't see the others." Sarah processed this information quickly. The terrorists had successfully trapped at least 12 military cadets in a kill zone. Their radios had been jammed or disabled. Help was not coming anytime soon. In her previous life, this would have been a tactical problem to solve. Identify enemy positions, find their weaknesses, exploit those weaknesses, and eliminate the threat. But now she was responsible for the lives of young cadets who had never faced anything more dangerous than a training exercise. "Listen to me very carefully," she whispered to her team. "I need everyone to stay exactly where they are and follow my instructions without question. Lives depend on it." Morrison found his voice again. "Martinez, what makes you think you can handle this situation?" Quote, Sarah looked at him with eyes that had seen too much violence for someone her age. "Because 3 years ago, I spent 6 months hunting members of the Revolutionary Liberation Front through the mountains of Honduras. And before that, I spent 2 years as part of a classified unit that specialized in counter-terrorism operations. The team stared at her in shock. That's impossible, Stevens whispered. You're 22 years old. I'm 25, Sarah corrected. I spent 4 years in black operations before coming to the academy. Operations that officially never happened. Against enemies that officially don't exist. Another burst of gunfire reminded them of their immediate danger. I don't care if you believe me or not, Sarah continued. But if you want to survive this, you'll do exactly what I say. These aren't amateurs, they're professionals, and they've probably killed more people than everyone in this forest combined. Morrison's leadership confidence had completely evaporated. What do you need us to do? Sarah smiled grimly as she began shifting into the mindset that had once made her one of the most effective operatives in the intelligence community. First, we're going to show these terrorists what happens when they threaten American military personnel. She paused to observe the enemy positions again, her mind already working through tactical scenarios. Then we're going to remind them why they should have stayed hidden in whatever hole they crawled out of. For the first time since the exercise began, Team Delta was about to discover why their quiet, underestimated teammate had been known in certain classified circles by a very different name. The same name that would soon echo through the forest with a meaning these terrorists understood all too well. The forest had fallen into an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Sarah counted at least 6 different firing positions on the hillside above them, which meant they were outnumbered 2-to-1 by trained killers. The Revolutionary Liberation Front had chosen their ambush site perfectly, using the natural terrain to create an inescapable trap. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had assumed their targets were just military students. Thompson, do you still have visual on Team Echo? Sarah whispered into her radio, using a frequency she hoped the terrorists hadn't identified. 2 of them are alive behind that fallen tree, came the shaky reply. I think the others are either down or scattered. Sarah closed her eyes and forced herself to think like the operative she used to be. 12 possible hostages, unknown number of terrorists, limited ammunition, no backup, compromised communications. In her previous life, this would have been classified as a nearly impossible rescue scenario. Morrison, she said quietly, I need you to listen very carefully. In about 30 seconds, I'm going to create a distraction. When I do, you and Stevens are going to move to that ridgeline on our left and establish overwatch positions. Morrison's face was pale with terror. Martinez, those people have real guns. We'll be killed, not if you follow my instructions exactly. Sarah's voice carried the calm authority of someone who had faced death before and won. Johnson and Walker, you're going to provide covering fire for the Team Echo survivors and help them reach our position. With what? Walker demanded. These training rifles won't stop real bullets. Sarah smiled grimly. Leave that to me. She reached into her pack and pulled out what appeared to be a standard emergency flare. But as she twisted the base in a specific sequence, hidden compartments revealed themselves. The device transformed into something that definitely wasn't standard cadet equipment. What the hell is that? Stevens whispered. Emergency communication beacon. Sarah lied smoothly. Special forces use them for extraction calls. What she didn't tell them was that the device was actually a prototype weapon system that she had been field testing during her last classified mission. Officially, it didn't exist. Unofficially, it could take out multiple targets from a considerable distance. Another transmission crackled over the terrorist frequency. Military cadets, this is your final warning. Surrender now, or face the consequences. Sarah recognized the voice from intelligence briefings. Carlos Mendoza, the RLF's chief of operations. She had spent months tracking him through Central America before losing his trail near the Mexican border. Now she knew where he had gone. Team Delta, this is Martinez. She spoke into her radio using clear text. I'm going to end this conversation. She stood up from behind her cover, making herself visible to the terrorists on the hillside. Immediately, several rifles swung in her direction. My name is Sarah Martinez, she called out loudly, her voice echoing through the forest. I'm a cadet at the Coastal Defense Academy. And you've made a serious mistake. Serious. I'm a cadet at the Coastal Defense Academy. Gunfire erupted from multiple positions, but Sarah had already moved. Years of combat experience guided her movements as she rolled behind another tree, avoiding the bullets by inches. "Carlos," she shouted, using the terrorist leader's name. "I know it's you up there. Did you really think you could hide from us forever?" The shooting stopped abruptly. When Mendoza's voice came back over the radio, it carried a note of uncertainty. "Who are you?" Sarah smiled coldly. "Someone who's been looking for you for a very long time." She activated the hidden weapon system and began marking targets through her scope. The thermal imaging showed her exactly where each terrorist was positioned, even through the dense foliage. "Martinez, what are you doing?" Morrison hissed from his position. "Ending this," she replied. The first shot took out the terrorists' radio jamming equipment with surgical precision. Immediately, their communications came back online, and Sarah could hear frantic transmissions from Thunderbase trying to reach all teams in Sector 7. The second shot disabled their primary weapon position, sending 2 terrorists scrambling for new cover. "Impossible," came Mendoza's voice over the radio. "No cadet has access to that kind of equipment." Sarah activated her radio and transmitted on an encrypted frequency she hadn't used in 3 years. "Thunderbase. This is Iron Wolf. I have multiple hostiles in Sector 7 threatening American military personnel. Request immediate backup and medical support." The response came immediately from a voice she hadn't heard since her last debriefing. "Iron Wolf. This is Overwatch Control. Confirm your identity and status. Authentication code Delta 77 Alpha," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Iron Wolf is operational and engaging hostile forces." The silence that followed was broken by a new voice on the radio, one that made every member of Team Delta freeze in recognition. "Iron Wolf. This is Marine Colonel Harrison. We've been wondering where you disappeared to." Morrison stared at Sarah in complete shock. "Harrison? As in, Commandant Harrison? The guy who ran Black Ops in Afghanistan?" Sarah was already moving again, using her advanced training to close distance on the terrorist positions. "Rogers. Confirm Iron Wolf is cleared for full operational authority." She transmitted. "Iron Wolf, you are weapons-free and cleared for all necessary actions. Marine Quick Response Team is en route to your position." Carlos Mendoza's voice cut through the military chatter, now filled with growing panic. "Iron Wolf? That's impossible. Iron Wolf is supposed to be dead." Sarah smiled as she reached her new position, now close enough to see the terrorist leader through her scope. "Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. Carlos." What happened next would later be described in classified after-action reports as a textbook example of advanced combat tactics. Sarah moved through the forest like a ghost, systematically neutralizing terrorist positions with precision that left her former teammates speechless. But it was what happened when she reached Mendoza's position that would become legendary among those with proper security clearance. The terrorist leader had taken cover behind a large boulder, clutching an assault rifle and screaming orders at his remaining men. When Sarah appeared in front of him like a shadow materializing from nowhere, his face went white with recognition. "Hello, Carlos," she said calmly, her weapon trained on his center mass. "We have some unfinished business to discuss." Mendoza dropped his rifle and raised his hands. "Iron Wolf, we thought the bombing in Syria had killed you." "I got better," Sarah replied. "Now, you're going to call off your remaining men and surrender to the Marine unit that's about to arrive." "You don't understand," Mendoza pleaded. "This wasn't supposed to happen. We were just supposed to kidnap some military cadets for ransom. We had no idea you were here." Sarah's expression hardened. "You threatened American military personnel on American soil, Carlos. That was your second mistake. What was the first? You assumed I was just a cadet." The sound of approaching helicopters filled the air as Marine Quick Response Teams arrived to secure the area. Sarah kept her weapon trained on Mendoza until armed Marines took him into custody. As the immediate danger ended, Sarah walked back toward her teammates, who were staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Martinez," Morrison said slowly. "Who are you really?" Before she could answer, Colonel Harrison's voice boomed through the forest as he approached with a squad of Marines. "Iron Wolf," he called out. "Outstanding work as always." The entire team watched in stunned silence as one of the most respected Marine officers in the military walked up to their quiet teammate and shook her hand with obvious respect. "Colonel," Sarah replied. "Thank you for the backup," Harrison grinned. "Are you kidding? We've been looking for an excuse to bring you back to active duty. This little terrorist problem just gave us the perfect opportunity." Stevens found his voice first. "Sir, with all due respect, Martinez is just a cadet like the rest of us." Harrison looked at Stevens as if he had said something amusing. "Son, the woman standing next to you spent 4 years as one of our most effective counterterrorism operatives. She's personally responsible for dismantling 3 terrorist cells, preventing at least 6 major attacks, and saving more American lives than most Marines see in their entire careers." Thompson stepped forward. "But sir, she's been at the academy for 4 years. How is that possible?" "Because," Harrison explained, "sometimes our best operatives need time to recover from what they've seen and done in service to their country. The academy was supposed to be her transition back to normal military service." He looked at Sarah with a mixture of pride and concern. "Though I'm guessing normal was never really an option for you, was it?" Sarah shrugged. "It seemed worth trying, sir." Banks, who had remained silent during the entire exchange, finally spoke up. "So when we called you inexperienced, when we said you'd never been in a real fight, when we treated you like you didn't belong here, you were just doing what came naturally," Sarah said gently. "I never corrected you because my previous service was classified. As far as anyone knew, I was just another cadet." Morrison looked sick. "We assigned you to camp maintenance and first aid duty." Harrison laughed out loud. "Son, you assigned a former special operations medic to first aid duty? That's like assigning a Formula One driver to drive the pace car." As the Marine teams finished securing the area and processing the captured terrorists, word of the incident spread rapidly through military channels. By evening, every cadet at the Coastal Defense Academy knew the story of how Sarah Martinez had single-handedly neutralized a terrorist threat. But the real revelation came the next morning, when the Academy's entire cadet corps was assembled for an emergency briefing. Colonel Richards stood at the podium, but he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a Marine general whose chest displayed ribbons from conflicts spanning 3 decades. "Cadets," Richards began, "yesterday's events have revealed something that changes everything you thought you knew about one of your classmates." He gestured to Sarah, who stood at attention in the front row. "Cadet Martinez, please join us on stage." As Sarah walked to the podium, 200 cadets watched in complete silence. These were the same cadets who had whispered about her, excluded her, and dismissed her as someone who didn't belong. General Morrison stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to present someone whose service to this country has been extraordinary by any measure. For the past 4 years, she has walked among you as a simple cadet. But before that, she served her country in ways that most of you will never fully understand." He paused, looking directly at the assembled cadets. "The woman you know as Sarah Martinez was, until 4 years ago, one of the most effective special operations personnel in the United States military. Operating under the call sign Iron Wolf, she completed 47 successful missions across 6 different countries." The auditorium was so quiet that the sound of breathing seemed loud. "Yesterday, when faced with a genuine terrorist threat, Iron Wolf did what she has always done. She put the lives of her fellow service members above her own safety and eliminated a danger to American military personnel." General Morrison turned to Sarah. "Agent Martinez, your country owes you a debt of gratitude that can never be fully repaid. Your fellow cadets owe you their lives." The general faced the assembly again. "I want everyone in this room to remember this moment. Remember that heroes don't always look like what you expect. Remember that courage comes in many forms. And remember that sometimes the person sitting next to you has already proven their worth in ways you can't imagine." He stepped back, and Colonel Richards returned to the podium. "As of today," Richards announced, "Cadet Martinez will graduate first in her class and will have her choice of any assignment in the military. Her record of service speaks for itself. But Sarah stepped forward to the microphone. "Thank you, sir. But I have a request." The room held its breath. "I'd like to complete my final exercise with Team Delta, if they'll have me." She turned to look at Morrison, Stevens, and the others who had spent 4 years underestimating her. "That is, if you think a former special operations agent can handle camp maintenance and first aid duties." Morrison stood up slowly, his face red with embarrassment and something that might have been respect. "Martinez. Sarah. Iron Wolf. I don't know what to call you anymore." Sarah smiled. "My friends call me Sarah." Morrison nodded. "Sarah, it would be an honor to complete the exercise with you. But maybe this time, you could handle the tactical planning?" The auditorium erupted in laughter and applause. Later that evening, as Sarah packed her gear for the completion of Operation Thunderstrike, she reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. 4 years ago, she had been a shadow warrior operating in the darkest corners of the world. Today, she was a military cadet preparing for a training exercise with teammates who finally saw her for who she really was. Jenny Chen knocked on her door and entered with a knowing smile. "So, Iron Wolf? Huh?" Sarah grinned. "You suspected something. The way you moved, the way you analyzed situations, the way you slept like someone who'd learned to stay alert even while unconscious." Jenny sat on her roommate's bed. "I knew you were different. I just didn't know how different." Sarah looked at the photograph she had hidden for so long, the one showing her with her old unit in some unnamed desert. "Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice coming here." "Are you kidding?" Jenny laughed. "You just saved 12 lives and captured a terrorist leader." "I'd say you made exactly the right choice." Sarah nodded, thinking about her teammates, who now saw her completely differently. Tomorrow they would complete their exercise, but this time as equals, rather than as people humoring someone they thought was weak. "Besides," Jenny added with a grin, "think about how Morrison's going to explain this to his brother, who said women don't belong in combat." Sarah laughed, imagining that conversation. "I suspect his perspective might have changed somewhat." Sarah, "May have changed somewhat." Alanovit, "May have changed somewhat." Alanovit, "May have changed somewhat." May have changed somewhat. As night fell over the academy, Sarah prepared for sleep with the knowledge that her secret was finally out. No more hiding who she was, no more pretending to be inexperienced, no more listening to comments about her abilities without response. Tomorrow, Team Delta would complete Operation Thunderstrike. But this time, they would do it with the full knowledge that their teammate wasn't just a cadet who had gotten lucky. She was Iron Wolf, and she was exactly where she belonged.